Hello, this is Falterfire, and this is a guide adjacent list. It's going to be in my playlist with my guides, but really it is, like most of my top 10 card lists, just an excuse for me to talk about some cards that I like a bunch. So this is specifically talking about the top 10 best new generic cards in the release patch. So this is cards that were not in Trials of the Breach Part 2 and were added for the release. This will include cards that are both open in packs and from quests, and the ones that are from quests, I will mention which quest they are from. But it will not talk. I won't be talking about monster cards or idle cards or manic presence weather cards or there's another category here, Magyar cards. I'm only talking about generic cards that you can include for any character in the starting deck for commons or the card pool for all rarities. So let's get into it. First of all, number 10. Judicious Cure. So this is 3 mana, skill. Put 1 card on top of your deck to cleanse yourself 3 times. The upgrade cleanses your still put 1 card on top of the deck and you cleanse yourself 4 times. So this is of the cards on the list, the only one that I don't actually use that often, although I can absolutely recognize its power. It is, I think, the only card at all that will give you 3 cleanses with a single card play. Is pretty upgrade. The other one would be Defensive Field. Technically can give you 3 cleanses if you choose 3 of the cleansing option, but because the cleanse option costs 2 mana before upgrade, you're looking at 7 mana for that triple cleanse as opposed to 3. And 3 is, I would say, a substantial discount. So Judicious Cure, the obvious downside here is you have to put a card back on top of your deck, which can be an upside. That can let you save a card for next turn. It could let you set up a divination. And if you use it on a temporary card, you can not have to deal with that temporary. That temporary card will just disappear, and you don't have to worry about spending a draw again on something you already drew. The biggest downside to Judicious Cure is honestly not the put 1 card on top of your deck. It is the fact that it is a card that cleanses and does nothing else, which means that if you don't need cleanse, it is a dead card. This is in contrast to something like what am I thinking of? This is in contrast to something like Sanctuary or Cleansing Shield, both of which will give you shield in addition to cleansing, or in contrast to a card that shows up much higher on this list that also will do things besides simply cleanse you. But all that said, cleanse is valuable, and this is a lot of cleanse for fairly cheap with no drawbacks, or a relatively minimal drawback, so it's worth considering. Next, number 9, Assisted Focus, which is a mana card, costs 0 to play, and then you gain 2 mana, and you summon 1 allied runic sprite, and the upgrade is you gain 3 mana, you summon 1 allied runic sprite plus. So, runic sprite, when it takes its action, it gives you Wits 1, Growth 1, and then growth equal to how much powerful it has. And the upgraded version gives you Wits 2, and then the same Growth 1 and Growth 1 per powerful it has. The thing that this does for you is, as long as the runic sprite is alive, so if you're not using other summons, this is fairly low cost to include. If you don't care about blocking the personal summon slot with a runic sprite, basically this is just +1 card per turn. If you don't have any other wits, this is +1 card per turn, every turn, until as long as the sprite is alive. And if you upgrade it, you'll have extra wits for powering things like Mind Over Body or Quip Shot or various Nema things, I guess. And if you also have other wits generation, having that extra +1 wits a turn will just mean that your wits will stay stable. You won't lose it to drawing cards per turn. If you want to start actually gaining wits, you will need to spend an upgrade here, but that's fine. This is a pretty okay upgrade. Also get a little bit of growth. It's not a ton of growth, but it's a little bit of growth. It's the same amount of growth that you would get from holding an unupgraded Patient Focus, but you also are getting wits, so that's nice. Of course, the runic sprites can die. That can sometimes be a downside. Some enemies have AoE attacks that are life-stealing, so they can heal off of killing your sprites. But in general, you're more happy to have them than you're sad. And also sometimes you'll find there are a few cards that give your allies death spores. And so if you find those, you can just get some incidental value where you take like a Forest Magic or what's the other one? I forget the name of it. The Arcane Spores, maybe. That's the Forest Investigation unlock. And you'll pick one of those up, and you'll just happen to have given your allies Death Spores, and then they die to an AoE attack, and you get a bunch of free powerful, and that's really nice. So all in all, just a solid little utility card. It's great to have just like one of if you are at a point where you want another mana card, but you don't really know what it should be. Assisted Focus is a great choice. Next up, number 8, Barbed Strike. Barbed Strike is a card that existed before, but the new version is very different. It is 3 mana, strike, deal 4x2 damage to the first enemy, gain Reflect 3, plus Reflect equal to 8% of your current shield. The upgrade is still 3 mana, deal 5x2 damage to the first enemy, gain Reflect 5, plus Reflect equal to 10% of your current shield. So this is the cornerstone of the Reflect deck. This is the Reflect generation engine. You don't need that much shield for this to be quite a lot of Reflect. Even if you have, say, 20 shield, that'll still be an extra 1.6, which rounds up to, so it'll be a total of 5 Reflect for the unupgraded version, or 7 Reflect for Barbed Strike Plus with 20 shield, which again is a pretty low amount. And Reflect is also something where having 2 commons that can generate a good amount makes it a lot easier to stack. Reflect, as a game plan, you will need a backup plan for the Reflect deck because of enemies that don't attack that often. But the new Barbed Strike is definitely a lot more consistent as a way to clear out fights than the old version was. Or a lot more, because it's a way to set up Reflect. Because previously the Reflect deck had this problem where you were very dependent on finding one of the 2 or 3 multiple copies of the 2 or 3 generic rares that gave you Reflect. And with Barbed Strike now being able to single-handedly manage your Reflect scaling, that is much less of an issue than it was before. Next up, Flash Shock. So this is 1 mana, skill, epic. Gain evasion 1 this turn and apply 3 fixed shock to all enemies, and then you draw 1 whenever you deal 20 or more damage with a card. The upgrade is 0 mana and 4 fixed shock. So this is one of those cards that is better than it looks. The thing is, if you're playing a deck like Merlee or a lot of aggro decks, this is effectively at least 1 to 2 free evasion each turn for the low cost of 1 to 2 on your fatigue counter. This does affect the fatigue counter when you draw it, and if you are fatigued, you will quickly find yourself unable to play it. You should also be careful when you have this, because if you are fighting enemies with Opportunist, you want to be careful that you don't accidentally trip Opportunist by playing a card that does enough damage to draw Flash Shock. But having access to this evasion, and the Shock can be useful too. The Shock can also help set it up. But just having this source of evasion that you can easily get every time you play damaging cards can be very nice for survivability for aggressive decks. And I tend to find that this is a very good upgrade. The difference between 1 mana and 0 mana is huge. Being able to play this twice for free, especially if your deck doesn't have a ton of spare mana, and aggro decks often can be tight on mana. This is very good. Number 6, Burning Prism. So Burning Prism is 1 mana, skill, common, gain burn 1 and mighty 3, create a temporary slash, burst of strength, or cauterize. The upgrade has the exact same text, except it makes upgraded cards. So slash is a 1 mana strike, deal 3x3 damage to the first enemy. Burst of strength is a 0 mana skill, gain powerful 2 this turn. Cauterize is a 1 mana skill, cleanse yourself twice, then gain burn 1. Slash plus is 3x5, burst of strength plus is powerful 4. Cauterize plus is 0 mana, cleanse yourself 3 times, then gain burn 2. So this card is really good for aggro decks that, honestly, whether you're winning on turn 1 or not. First of all, being a card that gives you mighty 3 and is a good card makes this immediately a way to enable the Gather Power deck. Gather Power is one of the best common sources of powerful, one of the only common sources of non-temporary powerful, and Burning Prism makes it much more consistent because you just get a lot of mighty from Burning Prism. So you run 2 Burning Prisms, you run 2 Gather Powers, you run whatever else to facilitate the rest of the deck, and you are off to the races. On top of that, this can be cleanse. The fact that this is a cleanse card, because with Judicious Cure, and this isn't even the card I was talking about compared to Judicious Cure, but I had forgotten this is also on the list. So with Judicious Cure, I mentioned that if you don't need the cleanse, it's kind of dead. But this isn't dead. If you don't need the cleanse, this can still be powerful this turn. It can be damage, which can help you cleave through evasion. And slash plus hitting 5 times can be a lot, especially if you have powerful, which the Burning Prism deck, as I mentioned, often going to be a gather power deck. That slash can absolutely body enemies if you are later in the fight. So the other note here is the upgrade gives you a 1 mana access to cleanse 3 times. That is, again, capable of also being temporary powerful or a solid damage card, which also just generally a very, very handy card to have. I wouldn't put it in every deck. Sometimes you don't care about, if you don't care about the slash or the burst of strength, this is a lot worse. I would only play this if you are a deck that wants to make slash or burst of strength on a regular basis, or that really cares about this mighty. If you are not doing that, then not so good. This also has a downside where it doesn't play nice with purity on yourself. If you're using if you need to cleanse yourself while you have purity, it will take 2 ranks of purity. Once when you play the Burning Prism, once you play Cauterize, which can be annoying. Although I will say this, it is useful to note that this initial burn will get cleansed off by the Cauterize. So if you don't have any burn and you play this, even though you gain burn 1 twice, you effectively will still only end with 1 burn, which means that you don't have to worry about that too much. So it's a very good card. Arguably could be higher, but I really like the other cards on the list. So number 5, Divine Wind. So this drops from the Final Confrontation quest, which is the quest that unlocks idols. So the last quest on the list, although whether or not it is the hardest depends on how much you struggle with Special Meal, I think. So Divine Wind is a 1 mana skill. It is legendary, which legendary means you only play 1 legendary card per fight. Once you've played a legendary card, all other legendary cards become unplayable. Now that said, once you take a legendary card, you will not be offered legendary cards in future card picks. So the only way you would have that option available to you even is if you had copied it. So don't copy legendary cards, you won't get any value. But the point being, 1 mana skill, legendary, you and your allies gain Divinity 4, Divinity being a buff that says you deal 5% extra damage and apply 5% extra status per rank, and you take 3% less damage and 30% less status per rank. And then you create 1 Divine Gust, and then it's removed. So removed makes sense, legendary, you can only play it once anyway. And then you have a Divine Gust, which is a 5-cost skill that says heal 15 and gain growth 1 per overheal. So if you were missing 10 health, you would heal 10 and then 5 overheal would convert into growth 5. Then you're going to cleanse yourself twice and reduce all of your statuses by 10. The upgrade is what for Divine Wind? Divine Wind Plus gives you Divinity 5, creates a Divine Gust Plus, and Divine Gust Plus heals you for 18 and cleanses yourself 3 times and reduces all statuses by 12. So this is a very good card. Right off the bat, you are getting plus 20 or plus 25% damage and status for the entire rest of the fight, along with 12% or 15% incoming damage and status reduction. And then you're also getting a card that is a very, very good growth source, that is also a very good cleanse card, that also will manage self-status. This is just all around a fantastic card for any deck that is playing a slower game, by which I mean you're planning to play out for 3 or more turns. If you're playing a fast deck, if you're only planning to take out 1 or 2 turns, then Legendary Strike will often be better because Legendary Strike's Invincible will just completely block off enemy damage for a turn, which can be what you want. But if that is not the case, Divine Wind is going to offer a lot of value. It is growth, it is cleanse, it is that permanent damage and status buff, permanent damage and status reduction, just all around a good time. It does also give any allies Divinity 5, any allies who have Divinity 5, although if those allies die, unfortunately the Divinity you just won't be able to get that on your future allies. So you might want to try and time that well, although normally I tend to just fire it off as soon as possible. It's rare that even if I have allies, it's rare that I care that much about getting the Divinity onto them. And the main exception to that would be Magyar, and Trill is always there at the start of the fight anyway. So, just a very solid card. Next up, Mystical Torrent. So this is a 5-cost skill. Transform one card into Arcane Spout. It retains its removed or temporary copy, or its removed or temporary property. And the upgrade is a 6-cost skill that says transform one card into Arcane Spout plus retains its removed or temporary property. So Arcane Spout. Arcane Spout is a mana card. It is gain 3 mana. You apply 8 Arcane to all enemies and 8 Arcane to a random enemy. And it upgrades into gain 5 mana and then 11 Arcane to all enemies and 11 Arcane to a random enemy. This is very, very good. Arcane's Mystical Torrent Plus. This is one of the cards where I think if you take it, you want to upgrade it ASAP. Mystical Torrent Plus is just so much better because Arcane. So basically, what you do is you have Mystical Torrent Plus, and then you're just going to use that to upgrade whatever other cards in your deck from being, it's obviously incredible if you use this on a Blight. But even if you can't use this on a Blight, you play Mystical Torrent Plus on a Focus, which Focus is either 2 or 4 mana, and now instead of being gain 2 mana or gain 4 mana, it is gain 5 mana and Arcane Blast all your enemies. This is a fantastic way, having a bunch of Arcane Spout Plus in your deck, very good. They are good mana sources, they are incredible arcane sources, they are capable of getting you 2 separate detonations from one card, which means you can get 2 dispels out of it. If you have multiple enemies, then you won't get the random arcane necessarily on the enemy that you want, but you will get maximum value out of that AoE arcane. So if you compare this to Arcane Nova, which is 5 mana for apply, I think 15 arcane to all enemies, this is the unupgraded version is not as good as Arcane Nova, but the upgraded version here is much, much better than Arcane Nova Plus because it is effectively, because you get this mana back, it's effectively 1 mana for all this effect, and the Arcane Spout sticks around as long as if you transform something that wasn't removed or temporary, you will be able to redraw that Arcane Spout later in the fight for even more value. I have done a lot of runs where my game plan did boil down to I'm going to Mystical Torrent a bunch of stuff, and then I'm going to Arcane Spout all of my problems away until they are dead. And this is also great for just any enemy that's trying to stack powerful. No, they're not. No, they're not. Their buffs are gone. Use Arcane Spout away all their buffs. It's great. It's a lot of fun. Oh, and if you have something like Tormenting Gloves or Protective Crystal, I think is the name of the one that gives you shield every time you trip a status, it's even better. Next up, Ultimatum. So this is from the Outside Influence quest. Now, this is a card that I underrated at first that has gone steadily up in my estimation. It is an 8 mana spell. You deal 15 damage to any enemy and 15 damage to all enemies. They lose 2 Divinity, gain Purity 2, and Spell Weave 2. Gain Purity 2 if this is in your hand at end of turn. The upgrade is 15 damage to any enemy, 18 damage to all enemies. They lose 3 Divinity. You gain Purity 3 and Spell Weave 3. You gain Purity 3 if this is in your hand at end of turn. So the important thing here really is that last line. Gain Purity if this is in your hand at end of turn. That is just an incredibly powerful effect to have. And it is on a card that also has is decent if you can play it. But if you can't ever play Ultimatum, it'll still do good work for you. As long as you are letting enemies take turns, having Purity can be very, very valuable, especially against some of the new debuffs. For example, Decay and Madness, which cannot be cleansed, as well as Enfeebled. All of those can't be cleansed, but they can be blocked with Purity, which makes Ultimatum very valuable. It also provides some minor scaling to you thanks to the Spell Weave. It will help counteract. It is the only way outside of the Phantasgal trinket that is only available during the Outside Influence the Final Confrontation quest is the only way to get rid of Divinity on enemies. So if you're playing a slower deck and you are fighting one of the if you're fighting regular Mudrara, which tends to stack a decent amount of Divinity, this can be very handy for just keeping that in check. And just overall, that Purity, it's mostly about the Purity, if I'm being honest. This being a 0-cost way to get Purity, and end of turn is really when you want the Purity a lot of the time, especially if you have stuff that debuffs yourself, you actually might rather have the Purity at end of turn so you don't have to worry about accidentally using it up with Blazing Ritual or Precarious Draught that is doing a debuff that you don't care that much about. So just really a card that's grown on me the more I've used it. Next up, Creative Outburst, which is a card that I liked when I first read it, and then I have played it, and I liked it even more. So it is 1 mana skill, create 1 temporary Resolute Focus, Block, Introspection, or Deadly Creativity. Upgrades to do still 1 mana, and you create an upgraded whichever card you pick. So Resolute Focus is a mana, gain 3 mana if played after a skill. Notably, Creative Outburst is a skill, so you can always go Creative Outburst into Resolute Focus, and that will always work. Resolute Focus Plus is 5 mana. Block is 2 mana skill, gain 12 shield, upgrades to be 18 shield. Introspection is 3 mana, draw 2, upgrades into 4 mana, draw 3. And then Deadly Creativity is the card here that is new and only shows up from Creative Outburst. And the Deadly Creativity is 3 mana, spell, deal 3 damage to any enemy for every card you created this turn. It upgrades to be for 5 damage for every card you've created this turn. So what this means is that this is a card that can be mana, or draw, or shield, or damage, depending on what you need. Now, it's a bad rate on all of those. It is effectively 2 mana that is affected by fatigue, or 3 mana for a block, or 1 extra mana for a block or introspection, both of which are cards that are not super compelling to begin with most of the time. But the flexibility here is very important. If you're like me, you'll have a lot of runs where you are in this awkward spot in early game where your deck is often either short on mana or draw, and which one it is varies from turn to turn or from fight to fight as you're getting your pieces put together. And Creative Outburst works in either case. If you are low on mana, it is mana. If you are high on mana, it is draw. If you really need shield because you're too busy faffing about with other stuff, it is shield. And that damage can be substantial, especially if you're using things like treasures or defensive field or putrid idea or any number of other things that are creating cards. It's very easy for Deadly Creativity to get to a respectable amount of damage. And if you really want to go all in, Zebo has several videos, which I could probably dig up if you ask, but I probably won't remember to link in the description. But Zebo has a lot of videos of going off with Deadly Creativity and just creating a ton of cards and then doing a ton of damage with it. So it absolutely can work as a win condition if that is what you need it to be. And if you're playing, if you have it later in the run and you have upgraded it, it can absolutely just, even without focusing on it, it can pretty easily get up to like 40, 50 damage, which is entirely acceptable for effectively a 4 mana card. That, especially a 4 mana card that could also be a mana card, or could also be card draw, or could also be shield. So just really good all around. And finally, Umbral Rights. So when I started recording this video initially, I actually had forgotten this, because technically, if you were a beta player, it was available in Trials Part 2, because Meteor was very briefly in Trials Part 2 beta. But the point being, I had just started. I was, whoops, I forgot the number 1 card. I need to edit this slideshow and then start recording this over again. So Umbral Rights, and specifically Umbral Rights Plus. So Umbral Rights is a 2 mana skill. You transform 1 card into Shadowbone Cache, and you create 3 Shadowbone Caches. So you get a total of 4, the one you transform, plus 3 others. And Shadowbone Cache is a 1 mana skill. Create and choose 1 cache among 2, which basically it is an evil treasure. So instead of treasures which give you good things, it will give you things that are bad for your opponent. So it can summon Shadowbone, or it can summon Void Sprites, which apply a little bit of Arcane and Cursed enemies. It can give you a card that gives Frail and Leech and Poison to all enemies. It can give you a card that gives Arcane to an enemy based on how many debuffs it has. It can give you a card that gives Arcane and Weakness and Crystallize to an enemy. And it can give create a card that gives Curse 4 to an enemy. So those are all solid options. One of the big things here is like they work well together, and because you have gotten 4 caches, you will be able to combo them together. One thing you'll notice though is that because the Shadowbone Caches costs 1, you get 4 of them. This does make Umbral Rights effectively a 6 mana card, despite only allegedly costing 2 mana. However, Umbral Right Plus transforms 1 card into Shadowbone Cache Plus, and it creates 3 Shadowbone Cache Plus. Shadowbone Cache Plus costs 0 mana, and you create and choose 1 cache among 3. Which means now it is only a 2 mana card, and that is incredible. This is really like a 5 mana upgrade. 4 mana because you're saving 4 mana, and then the 5th mana because you are getting, like, the extra choices from the caches are easily worth at least a mana for the extra choice for all 4. So yeah, Umbral Rights Plus is kind of bonkers. Now, Umbral Rights Plus does have a couple major downsides. The first one is it is really bad into Bleed and Leech, or not Bleed and Leech, Bleed and Arcane Leak, because it is 9 card plays. The other downside is it creates a total of 7 cards, 3 caches plus 3 Shadowbone caches, and then 4 of the caches from inside the Shadowbone caches, which means that if you are decayed, it is really bad. But outside of those 2 scenarios, it is fantastic. The other thing is, unlike Mystical Torrent, which changes the card into something that's not going to go away, this does remove the card, which means this can be used to thin out your deck, which means that you can use it to get your deck down to just the key pieces that you care about. And especially with the number of blights that show up in depth 4, this is just very good. Now, that said, it doesn't require you to beat Special Meal, which is one of the harder quests. But wow, is it worth it? Umbral Rites Plus is incredible. I think it is in the card pool. Every single deck I've built that has a card pool has Umbral Rites at this point, I think. Because I don't care what deck I'm playing, it's going to be good. If I'm playing an aggressive deck, it's great. If I'm playing defensive deck, it's great. There is no deck that doesn't want the ability to just immediately shred all enemy purity and then blow them up with arcane detonations. Like that's just good. That's good. That's good. Every deck wants that. Every deck wants to be able to do that. And pretty much every deck can find something to feed to it. And if you're playing most characters, you will have some little bit of trash you can feed. Or if you don't get rid of a real card, you could like play your creative outburst. You create like a resolute focus or whatever. It doesn't matter what you create. You transform whatever you created and get your caches, and then you haven't given up a card, and you've still gotten all of your cache value. Umbral Rites Plus is just really, really crazy good. Honestly, Umbral Rites Plus should cost 4 mana. This upgrade should just be you upgrade it and now it costs 4 mana, but it doesn't. And yeah, it's busted. It's just really good. So that's it for now. That is the top 10 best new generic cards for the release patch. I still plan kind of to do a top 10 most improved cards, especially if this video gets likes, comments, etc. Which is most improved cards thing I've done for the last several things. And I just hadn't gotten around to it for this series, for this patch. Part of it is like, I wanted to get the Vortex Field Guide out first, and then I'm lazy. And then it felt like it had been long enough since the actual release patch dropped that it felt kind of late. But if this video does well, that'll be a sign to me that y'all like hearing me ramble about cards, and I will probably put that together. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments, etc., as always, leave a comment. You can always like and subscribe as well, do the usual YouTube stuff. Regardless, that is it for this time. I will see you next time. Until then, toodles.